Hello, everyone. Welcome into the third episode of the On the Rim podcast presented by Heart of the Continent Hoops. I'm the host, Elliott, and the season started. I know I didn't do an episode for April. I just thought it would be better just to do a season preview because I'm going to be talking about a lot of the players that got signed late in the period, and might as well just combo it in with the start of the season. And we're going to walk it back just a little bit. We're going to pretend for the first bit of the show that the first game of the season did not happen on Saturday, which we will recap, but we will go back and just kind of pretend like some of that didn't happen, and then we'll progress to the present. So let's just get right into it. For this episode, we're going to do a little bit of a few different things. So first, I'm going to go through, obviously the league has awards, so I'm going to make my own predictions for who I believe are going to be the award winners for this season. There's going to be a few changes. I'm going to talk about a few players. I'm going to have my pick, but I believe that there's going to be a few players I think are going to be in contention. And so we'll kind of get started there. And then after that, then we will get into who I believe are going to be the top teams in the league this season. And kind of, I'll throw some records out there. I'll get more into that when we talk about the standings piece. But it's not the actual records are not going to be super relevant, just to kind of give you a sense of where I think teams are going to be. And so we'll do that. And then again, like I said, we'll get into what I think or my thoughts on the first game of the year. So let's get into the award predictions. To begin the episode, we're going to go through the award predictions. So I'm going to name out the awards that we're going to talk about for the episode, and then I'll kind of give some names that I think are going to be in the mix, and who again, like I said, my pick is going to be. So obviously we will have the MVP trophy, and it'll be interesting to see how the player that the trophy is named after does in the league, and if he just automatically gets thrown into the MVP race. We'll see how much Xavier Moon plays, and when he joins, it could be a while for the Sea Bears, but we'll have to wait and see. We'll talk Canadian Player of the Year. We'll talk Coach of the Year. I am going to make a change. We will not do a Sixth Man of the Year, obviously, as we have no idea what rotations are going to be, so we might as well just change the award here. So I'm going to talk about who I believe will be the most improved player this season. Then we'll talk about Defensive Player of the Year, Developmental Player of the Year, and then Clutch Player of the Year. So we'll get started with the MVP. And my MVP pick for the 2026 CEBL season is none other than Sean East II. He was runner-up last year. I had a pretty good feeling this year, if Brampton was able to put some pieces around him, that if the team is better than the Edmonton team was last year in terms of record-wise, which we'll get into that later in the episode, I do think that Sean East II wins MVP in 2026. Now, again, like I said, I think that has to do with the pieces around him. Edmonton was okay last year. They weren't great. And I think this Brampton team this year is going to be so much better, and I think that will help him in his MVP case. But again, I still think that he's one of the best players in the league, and I think that he wins MVP just because Brampton is the best team. And I know people hate when some of that stuff comes up. Obviously, it comes up in the NBA. It's like, this player doesn't get to get thrown into the MVP conversation because their team isn't good enough. And I think it has a little bit to do here. Obviously, Teddy Allen won MVP the year the Sea Bears were good. And yes, they weren't the best team, but they were one of the better teams. So as long as Brampton's in the top three, I would say, I think he's safe to win the MVP award. Again, I will throw Teddy Allen out there. I think there's a chance that he wins the award. I also think there's a chance that the next player I talk about when it comes to Canadian Player of the Year has a shot as well, along with another player, and I'll just name him now, Quincy Guerrier. I think he gets thrown into the mix as well, potentially, if Montreal is good, and I think he might win Canadian Player of the Year, but he's not my pick for Canadian Player of the Year. When it comes to Canadian Player of the Year, though, I do believe that we will have a repeat winner this year. I do believe it'll be Tyrese Samuel. I just think he's the best Canadian in the league. He's a top 5 player overall. I just think that he's too good. He dominates the game in so many facets. I think the defense and if the defensive stats get better this upcoming summer, I think he could be in for, again, an MVP run. He's obviously going to be the best Canadian in the league by far. I think he and Quincy Guerrier, like I said, are kind of in that same realm. So I think Guerrier makes a run at it, but I still think that Samuel becomes the best player. And obviously, we don't know if he's going to leave again for the Summer League, but again, especially if he doesn't, I think he really makes a run at the MVP award. So when it comes to the Coach of the Year award, it's a little tough to make a prediction because you don't know. Sometimes it normally goes to whoever, like the coach that either the team exceed expectations, met expectations, the best team, that sort of thing. So I am going to go with Brampton Honey Badgers first year coach Alex Serta. I think just based on Brampton's roster, I think they have the best team. So I think the award just goes to who I believe will be the best team and their coach. So I think Serta will be fine unless he really doesn't use the roster as he should and doesn't get enough out of them. Then maybe that's how he loses the award. But personally for me, I think the Honey Badgers are going to be the best team. So we'll give the award to who I believe will pilot the best team. And it's a little bit of a cop-out. Maybe Mike Rainbow gets it. That's my other pick. Maybe the Sea Bears are a little bit better than we think they're going to be. Obviously, we know their roster's really good, and maybe Rainbow surprises some people and wins a few extra games based on X's and O's. Again, we'll talk about his first professional win later in the episode, but I think that Serta wins it just because I think Brampton becomes so dominant with how good of a roster that they have that I think he just automatically wins it because of that. So to replace the Sixth Man of the Year award, because again, like I said, we have no idea what the actual rotations are going to be for this upcoming season, we're going to replace it with Most Improved Player. And I've talked about some of these guys over the course of the offseason, whether that be an article. So if you haven't read some of my articles that have to do with the free agency, go check them out on hotchoops.blog. But I've also talked about it here on the podcast a few times. My pick, and I think it's going to be tough, especially after yesterday. I'm trying to take no yesterday bias into it, but I think my most improved player for 2026 is going to be Javonte Brown. I think he's going to have a huge summer for Calgary. Their front court depth is not what it's been in previous seasons, so unless he starts off the season as the starter and then gets moved to the bench because they bring in somebody else, I really do think that Javonte Brown is in for a huge season. He was fantastic last year for the Surge in limited playing time. I think if they give him the start and he's got players around him like Ruggsy Miller-Moore and Evan Gilliard that will be able to draw attention. So I just think with having Miller-Moore and Gilliard will allow for Brown to just take up so much space inside, grab some offensive rebounds, finish around the rim. I think he's going to be my most improved player. The other player that I had touted before the season as might be my most improved player was Tay Donald. He had a fantastic first game. He at least started out well in the first game. I wasn't too sure about the end of the game. I think the Sea Bears kind of figured him out and shut him down, but for a good portion of that game, I think he could be on the way to a fantastic breakout season. I love that Coach Jordan Baker's giving Donald this runway to just take off as a pro, and so this will be a fantastic opportunity for him. He had a good season in the winter, and if that can continue here, that would be great. I love watching him play. He's so much fun to watch. So I believe here Javonte Brown would be my pick for most improved. I'm going to go with Brown because I had a better feeling, and depending on how Edmonton's season goes and if they bring in other players, it might mean Donald gets moved further down the rotation, but he played well yesterday. I am recording this on Sunday. So on Saturday's game, I do believe that he had a good game. For Defensive Player of the Year for 2026, again, it's a little bit of a cop-out based on the Canadian Player of the Year, but I'm going to go with Defensive Player of the Year. I am going to go back with Jameer Nelson Jr. Jameer Nelson Jr. was one of the best defenders in 2025, and I just think that he's going to take it to another level in 2026 in a backcourt where he's with Sean East, and he is probably going to have a little bit more defensive responsibility, not being next to a guard that's as good defensively. Obviously, he was used to having Gilliard last year, who's, again, not as good of a defender, but I think the Surge were better set up defensively in terms of a scheme. So I think just this is going to highlight his his defensive prowess a lot more. And so I really do think that Jameer Nelson Jr. is in for a big 2026 and will be Defensive Player of the Year again. So as a caveat, obviously, when we talk about these awards, it all depends on if the players stay or not. The teams don't change a ton, that sort of thing. So again, just to reiterate, as I have in other previous episodes of the podcast and on my website, lots of this depends on if players are staying and still getting playing time and they don't come and go and that sort of thing. So now, when it comes to developmental player of the year, it's all about, will these players get playing time? And is there space for them as long as those rosters don't change too much? So, when it comes to the developmental player of the year, I am going with Aaron Rooms. He was last year's runner-up. He was in the conversation. He got a ton of time with Edmonton last year to kind of get his feet wet, and I think this year is going to be his year to win the award. For my considerations, I only picked players, or only considered players that were drafted this year, because otherwise it gets a little confusing. And so I just looked through the list of players drafted and the team's makeup, and I think Rooms has the best opportunity to find a foothold in Edmonton's rotation. Jordan Baker loves him a lot, and so I think that this will be his best opportunity to make a name for himself professionally, will be this season. The other player, and again, this is a little bit now based off of Saturday's opener, and yes, I said I wasn't going to try to do that, but I'd kind of already been thinking, does he get some run early in the year and get an opportunity? But I think Mason Krause really showed yesterday that I think he's here to play, and I think he's ready to go. And so he had a fantastic game yesterday. I think he was Winnipeg's one of their best guards, at least, and we'll talk about that later in the episode. But I really think that Rooms wins the award, and I think Mason will be close. But I think there will be at least a few players in and around the mix for developmental player of the year. Now, the last award that we will go through in this episode is Clutch Player of the Year. And I think this one might be the easiest award of all. It's Khalil Ahmad. There's nobody more clutch. He has the most target score winners in league history, and it's by a very wide margin. He's the clutchest player in the league. There isn't anybody that's as important to their team in crunch time than Khalil Ahmad. So again, 2026 will be another year that the Lion King wins games for Niagara. Now moving into the next section of the episode. If you're on YouTube, this is the benefit. I'm going to throw up some graphics here in a moment, based on these projected standings, that sort of thing. So if you're on audio, I will still say where I think the team will be placed and what record I believe generally I think that they're going to have. But the graphic will go up and you guys will see. It'll be nice, all and pretty for you guys to look at, that you guys can kind of reference as I go along here. So we will begin with the Eastern Conference as I throw that graphic up. I have the Brampton Honey Badgers winning the Eastern Conference. I've given them a projected record of 19-5. Again, I think they sit around that 18-19 win mark. As I've talked about, I think Brampton's the best team in the CEBL for 2026. As much as I believe the Sea Bears have the deepest roster, I think just talent-wise, I think Brampton's going to be the best, and I'm not sure how good the East is going to be this year, and so I think there's a good chance with the East maybe not being as good as they possibly could be. I think Brampton, just by default, by having better talent, wins a lot more games. I think Sean East is going to have a fantastic year again. I believe that he might be the MVP. I think Jameer Nelson Jr. goes back-to-back as Defensive Player of the Year, and Keon Ambrose Hilton is one of the best Canadian bigs in the league, and with the other players around them, I just think that they have one of the better rosters and are going to be a force in the CEBL for 2026. So in second place, I have the Niagara River Lions at 14-10. Again, they have a new head coach. This is the record they had last year. I didn't do the math, so this could be all these records are projected. They might not actually fit together for proper records and that sort of thing. It's just kind of to give you a sense of where I think they're going to sit in their overall record. But the River Lions have a new head coach this summer in Kimball McKenzie. Yes, he's a former player, and you have a core of Khalil Ahmad, Nathan Kayo, TJ Lal, and other guys who have played for the organization and at least with McKenzie, and so there should be a little bit of continuity there. I just don't know if they have as good of a roster as the Honey Badgers. And again, like I said, when it came to Brampton, I think the East is a little bit down again this year, and so I think just by default, you kind of have to put the River Lions in second. Obviously, they're the back-to-back champs. They're good enough to win games in the playoffs. They have an experienced roster, and so we're not talking about playoff success here, right now at least. But I do believe that the River Lions are still going to be good in 2026. They're just not going to be as good as they were last year, even with their slip-ups towards the end of the regular season. Who I have in third place are the Ottawa Blackjacks. Now, they vaulted past the Montreal Alliance, who I did have in third previously before, just the other day when the Blackjacks had signed Javonte Smart. I think he completely elevates that Blackjacks roster. He's a proven scorer. He's one of the best players in the league. At least he was in 2025. And I think the combination of he and Matthew Cleveland are going to be a fantastic duo. I just think that the Blackjacks are, again, overall, in terms of depth, I don't know if they're there, but I think those two as a 1-2 punch as your imports should be good enough to get you third and in and around a 500 record, whether that's 11-13 or 13-11, or as I have there, 12-12. As I just mentioned, I had to move the Montreal Alliance down a spot to 10-14. Again, these are all rosters based on what we know right now. Obviously, I'm basing it off before the season started and a little bit as I'm recording. Obviously, Quincy Guerrier is going to be very good. We're going to see if Keyshawn Barthélemy, who they've hyped up quite a bit, is good enough. I think the pieces in Montreal are okay. You lose Tavian Dunmartin. There's no Alain Louis currently. So I think the guard spot will be fine. But yeah, you have Guerrier. He should win you some games. He's going to be the engine for the Alliance. And so we'll see if Montreal is good. Obviously, I think they and Ottawa kind of battle for that the last two playoff spots. I think there's a gap between Brampton at the top, then the River Lions are by themselves, and I think there's a fight there between 3 and 4 as of right now. But again, you never know. These teams change quite frequently, but just based off what we know right now, I think Montreal will be fine. I think they make the playoffs, but I don't know if they have a very deep roster to really make too much noise here this season. And we come to the end of the Eastern Conference teams, and it is the Scarborough Shooting Stars. Right now I have them sitting at 8-16, but again, that's based off the roster they have right now. I am a huge Miles Powell fan. I loved watching him at Seton Hall. He was one of my favorite players in the Big East to watch, along with Marcus Howard. Those battles between Marquette and Seton Hall were fantastic. But I think Powell is good, and I think he's going to be really good in the CEBL. I don't see why he doesn't have success, but the rest of that roster is not currently anywhere good enough, at least from what I know and from what I can understand. I don't think that they have a good season unless, again, it's also Scarborough. They're going to bring in some guys late in the year or at least midway through the season. They might have a rough start, and maybe they sit in that third tier with Ottawa and Montreal, and I think that they do okay maybe if they can add a few players, but at least Powell will be fun to watch. Other than that, I don't think Scarborough is going to be good this season. I think they finish last in the CEBL. Now, moving on to the Western Conference, I will throw that graphic up now. We'll begin right away with the Vancouver Bandits. I think they sit at around 17-7 and finish first. I think they're 2 games back of Brampton from being the quote-unquote best team, and I think they're going to be just fine. Tyrese Samuel will be really good. Again, a player I didn't throw into that Canadian Player of the Year conversation is Michael Mulder, and I think he could be in that conversation as well. He might be in the MVP conversation, depending on how his season goes, but that dynamic duo might be one of the best next to Jameer Nelson Jr. and Sean East. So again, I think Vancouver will be just fine. I think I'm a little concerned about how their depth is going to be and how they manipulate their roster. Do you start Tevian Jones? Do you have him come off the bench? But having 2 really good star Canadians should solve a lot of their problems. I think they finished top of the West again in 2026. This next one might surprise some people. I know some people know that I am a Winnipeg Seabears fan. I'm not being too big of a homer here. I am a Seabears fan, but this is a pretty generally league biased pod. I just want to see some good basketball. And I think that the Seabears sits in second place. I think they still have a good season, around 15-16 wins. I think that they show that they have depth and they're a contender this year. I mentioned them earlier, obviously, with Mason Krause. If he continues to play at this steady level, the Sea Bears have depth, and I'm just not sure if this duo of Teddy Allen and Xavier Moon works. We don't know that yet. We won't know until late in the year when the team has kind of gotten used to playing together. So we'll have to wait and see, and that might hurt them in a few games, especially in that middle portion of the year when teams are really starting to ramp up and vie for playoff spots. But I think Winnipeg still finishes with one of their best records, or technically would be best record just based on overall volume. But I think this season will rival year one, where Teddy Allen steers the ship. Hopefully Xavier Moon can play complementary, and they have their front court is good enough with the bench unit being solid to complement all the other big pieces around them. So I think they sit around 16 wins. I think whatever it is, it's one game back of Vancouver, but Sea Bear fans are happy enough that Canada Life Center's packed again. The team is competitive, and I think they might be in for a playoff run in 2026. This one might surprise some people as we move into the third spot. I do have the Saskatoon Mamba sitting in that third spot. Now, again, I know I mentioned the East being down this year. I think because they're down and all those teams are kind of in that same group, that they kind of just trade wins and losses. So I think that's why their records are a little bit closer to 500. I think the West is deeper, but I think we kind of see what we saw last year, where the bottom of the West is the records just don't they don't look as nice because they're getting beat up by the other better teams in the West more often, but they beat the Eastern Conference teams. So I do have the Mamba sitting at 11-13 in their quote-unquote inaugural season. I wasn't too high on them until they signed 3 import players. I love Trey Townsend. I loved watching him at Oakland, and I thought he was really good for Arizona in the Big 12. Jalen Williams was fantastic with the Sea Bears. I guess maybe I shouldn't say fantastic. He was good with the Sea Bears. I thought he was a very good complementary piece to the rest of the roster. I think I do like what Jalen Williams brings. And then Tavion Dunn-Martin is a scoring machine that can shoot from anywhere and can pass. I thought that was a big signing for Saskatoon. I'm surprised he didn't go back to Montreal. He seemed to like his time in Montreal. So it seems to be that maybe Saskatoon is throwing money around. And so if the Mamba are throwing money around and they add Townsend, Williams, and Dunn-Martin, I think that they might have a shot at least for a playoff spot, and they're back in the playoff race for 2026. I am going to do something a little weird here. I am going to clump both Alberta teams in together just because I think that they're in the same tier. Obviously, as you saw from the graphic, I had Calgary sitting at 9-15 and the Stingers at 7-17. I think that them plus I think the Mamba are a little bit better than those teams, just at least on paper and from what we know so far. But when it comes to the 2 Alberta teams, I think Calgary is going to be slightly better than Edmonton. I think just because Calgary has Sean Miller-Moore, Evan Gilliard, I think there's a breakout from Javonte Brown coming. I just think it's a little bit better than what Edmonton has right now. Obviously, we saw yesterday they have a team that Jordan Baker likes. It's just a whole bunch of guys that are just good. They don't have a star, and even Nick Hornsby, who we call a star, is just he's in that great tier. He's not the star tier. For me, at least when it comes to Edmonton, I just don't know if they have enough firepower. Obviously, they don't have Nick Hornsby to start the year. Hopefully, he's joining soon. It was said yesterday on the broadcast that he wasn't going to be coming until May 31st, which is a little far away. That means that you got to go at least a month without him, or at least 3/4 of a month without him. That's a few games. So it might not have Edmonton start out great, but we'll have to wait and see. Calgary, I think, has a little bit of a higher ceiling just because their star power is better. But once again, I think those 2 teams are going to be in that bottom tier, and I'm not sure how good they're going to be, both of them, just based on the other rosters that we know on paper, at least around the league. So I know before we get into the next section where we recap the first game of the season, which was a good game, I know you guys are going to want my predictions, and so I'm going to make a prediction right now. Obviously, I know I had the standings. I'm going to make a championship final prediction. We're not going to go through a whole playoff bracket and all that stuff. So for the playoffs, the first year of the best of 3 series, My two finalists are going to be for the 2026 CEBL season, the Brampton Honey Badgers and the Winnipeg Sea Bears. I know that there's going to be some people going, well, he's a Sea Bears fan, yada, yada, yada. I do think that there is a chance that the Vancouver Bandits do slide into that spot instead of the Sea Bears. I just believe that the Sea Bears have enough depth to compete in the playoffs. I like Mike Rainbow's style for playoff basketball, and especially in a 3-game series, I think that benefits a little bit better. Obviously, I think Brampton is going to be the team out of the East. It's not even close. Maybe the River Lions compete because obviously they have the experience, but I do think that the Honey Badgers prevail because they have the better roster. So, my two finalists again are the Brampton Honey Badgers and the Winnipeg Sea Bears. My champion, I am going to go with the Brampton Honey Badgers. I think that, yes, I said that Winnipeg has the style for playoff basketball, but I think the Stars are just too big for even Teddy Allen and Xavier Moon and Winnipeg's depth. I think Sean East, obviously, with that MVP season, along with Defensive Player of the Year, Jameer Nelson Jr. I think the two of them, you've got one that's super high powered on offense, one that can lock up, one can outscore some of the players on Winnipeg. The other one is going to defend Xavier Moon and really limit his touches in Jameer Nelson Jr. So I really do think that the Brampton Honey Badgers come out on top in 2026. Time now to recap Game 1 of the CEBL season in 2026, and it was a fun, entertaining game. It was not the prettiest of games. Obviously, Edmonton's defense was fantastic to begin. Winnipeg obviously found their footing, and Mike Rainbow's style of play really did kind of impose on the game. They really started to get up and down, which I think was big for Winnipeg. I think that's how they kind of climbed back into the game, was their defense getting stops and getting quickly out in transition and getting easy buckets. That's how they started a lot of their runs. That's how they continued a lot of their runs. And so that was the game story. I think Edmonton was really good for the first quarter, and especially the end of the first half. It looked like Winnipeg was really, really frustrated with some of the mistakes and the turnovers, but that second half, I believe, was really all Winnipeg. It was a close game, and I think either team deserved to win, and I think that both teams imposed their style of play on each other, but just based on the second half, I think Winnipeg still made some mistakes, and there was still some rust, obviously, from both teams. But again, I do think that Winnipeg got the win in the end, just based off their play in the second half. Teddy Allen, he still looks dominant. Obviously, Edmonton threw a little bit different defense. Obviously, they threw some doubles at him, and they played him how teams kind of had played him when he was in the league previously. But I think Jordan Baker threw a little bit of a different wrinkle by it felt like playing a zone against Teddy, at least having one defender. It felt kind of like a box and one, but it wasn't really a box and one because the defenders on the other off-ball players for Winnipeg, the guys that they were getting guarded by were still kind of in the area of those players, but they were kind of showing that, hey, maybe we might double, we might switch here, and it was kind of making Teddy's day a little bit more difficult. They played really good on-ball defense against him, and especially off the ball, it really made him tough to try to get open and touch the ball. And again, like I said, when he touched the ball, when he had it, the Stingers had kind of shifted in a way that they were shaded towards the ball. Teddy wasn't really sure who was guarding him, and it was just made him tough to try to make decisions. Obviously, when he was open, he, for the most part, was making open shots, so it was good. But again, he hasn't played since March, but him still putting up 24, he was fantastic on the defensive rebounding end, and oh my goodness, the defense himself was so much more improved. So if Mike Rainbow has got him to buy in defensively, yeah, he might be the MVP because he might still put up 25 a game, but he might be a better defender in the end than Sean East. He broke the record for steals in the game by a Sea Bear. Yes, on Saturday. So again, it's one game. It's overreaction maybe, but again, at least for right now, Teddy Allen still looks dominant. I mentioned it earlier. I think Mason Krause has a role if he plays like that. It was a good game from him. He went 3 of 5 from 3. He had 4 rebounds. He hit the 2 clutch free throws at the end. But I just thought his defense as well was great. He bothered whoever he was having to guard, and he just made their life difficult. And if he can hit open shots, make some free throws, and again, play defense, you can't ask anything more. So I think if Winnipeg has he and Davion Warren in their backcourt off the bench, I think they're just fine. They're going to be great. I think Warren had a good start to the game, and he kind of faded throughout. But again, if he can put up around 10 a game, I think he's in that conversation for 6th man of the year. I think Mason Krause is in conversation for developmental player if he can even just hit an average of 2 threes a game. When it comes to the Stingers, though, it's not all doom and gloom. Obviously, I mentioned it earlier. Tay Donald had a fantastic game. I think he's in for a big season. I think he might be most improved, at least in my books. He had a fantastic start to the game. Again, just kind of like Davion Warren, he kind of faded throughout, and I thought maybe Jordan Baker would play him a little bit more. He did play quite a bit on Saturday. But again, it's the first game of the year. You don't want to overreact, but at least for right now, I think from what Donald showed, if he can shoot and he can play defense, I think Tay Donald's going to have a fantastic summer and be a really big piece for Jordan Baker. The other player that I was actually quite impressed by was Dame Danger. Obviously, there were some growing pains. It was his first time playing FIBA basketball, so getting acclimated was a little tough at times, but he had a nice block on Jeremiah Tillman. He had some easy buckets. I thought he was fine. I think Edmonton has a piece there. Obviously, if he can get really acclimatized to the league and the play style, I think he'll be just fine. I wasn't sure how he was going to be, but he impressed me to the point that I think Edmonton has a player there that they can at least build around and have somebody to kind of get some buckets for them and rebound and play Jordan Baker's a little bit small ball style of play. I do think that the story of the game were the turnovers and the points from turnovers. Obviously, there were 40 total turnovers in the game. Winnipeg won the points from turnovers battle. Edmonton just couldn't capitalize on Winnipeg's turnovers really early, and it cost them later in the game because then Winnipeg was generating turnovers on the Stingers and capitalizing on them. So again, that's Mike Rainbow's style of play for Winnipeg. He really emphasizes playing hard defense and just getting easy buckets, capitalizing on teams' mistakes. So again, if Winnipeg can replicate that for the rest of the season, it's going to be tough for other teams. They're going to be a top 3 defensive team. And again, the Stingers are always good defensively. Jordan Baker makes sure of that, but they got to capitalize. And I think it has to do with just the scoring talent in general for the team. They just don't have that like 1 or 2 guys that just score to try to capitalize off of stops and turnovers. But I think that was the biggest story of the game was just that, the turnovers and those points from those turnovers. So that's it for this episode. Thank you for watching and or listening, whether it's on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or on YouTube. I'm hoping that the show will either be weekly to bi-weekly, depending. Obviously, I think next week we're going to have a whole bunch to talk about. It was after the first season, so I'm hoping to get an episode out next week. But for sure, this will be a bi-weekly show. What will replace this, and again, if you don't already, go follow hotchoops.blog. You can get it in the link in the description of this video or on my socials at Elliott_Ressenholt. But if there isn't an episode for a Monday, as these episodes will be coming out on Mondays, there will at least be an article. I plan on posting a preview of the weekend. Most games, especially during the summer, will be happening on weekends in the CEBL. So I'm hoping on Fridays to have a article coming out about just to kind of keep up, hey, what's going on this weekend, who's playing, what are the storylines, and then doing at least a short recap of what happened if there isn't an episode on a specific Monday. That will be your filler gap of keeping up with the league. So again, thank you for watching. Click like and subscribe if you are watching on YouTube. Also hype the video if you're on mobile. That would be fantastic. I want to get into the algorithm. I want people to be watching the show and keeping up with such a great league that the CEBL is. And again, follow on Spotify and on Apple Podcasts. But thank you very much for watching and or listening, and I will see you in the next episode. Peace.